Thank you all for being here. This is our first EPN breakfast of 2026, so thank you all for being part of the beginning of our 2026 series. I hope you'll enjoy our program today about old-growth forests in Ohio. And I'm Harrison Freed. I'm the program director for the EPN. I've been in this role for about a year and a half. I'm not Tim Hab, who's the director of SENR. He is typically our opening speaker here at our breakfast series programs, but he's out sick today, so I'll be taking his place. So looking like we have a great program for you all today. We have excellent speakers who are going to be talking about the ecological and collaborative importance of old-growth forest management throughout Ohio. We have someone all the way from Maryland. We have people from southern parts of Ohio. We have people from all over the state who are going to be talking about old-growth forest management. When we first put together this program, we were thinking, old-growth forests in Ohio, I didn't know we had those. And then with more research and more community conversations, we started to realize that this is an excellent conversation to have, especially today as we think about how communities can come together to identify unique and important forest stands in their communities and figure out ways to preserve them in perpetuity. So you're going to hear a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different opportunities for growth and for conservation today from our speakers. And I'm really looking forward for you to have the same opportunity that we've had putting together this program to gain a little bit from their expertise. So with all that said, we're going to talk a little bit about the logistics before we get into the program. We also, in addition to everybody here in the room, we have over 100 live streamers from across the state of Ohio, which is probably a record for a January program. So we're really happy about that. The Ohio Woodland Stewards Program and the Old Growth Forest Network communities are part of that virtual base of folks who are watching today. And then look around the room today. We have an amazing group of folks who braved the cold weather on January 13th to make it here in Columbus, including folks from Cleveland and from other communities across Ohio who made it in here for this event. So thank you all again for being here. Okay. On your tables, you have a brochure. It's that packet with the old growth forest image. In that brochure, you'll find biographies and titles for all the speakers today. I encourage you to reference that as we transition between speakers. If you're watching virtually, you'll be able to find the virtual link to the brochure online. That link is going to be posted into the chat by Molly Bean any moment now. We also have the Facilities Operations and Development Department at Ohio State, the Water Management Association of Ohio, Delco Water Company, ENGIE North America, and the Ohio State Energy Partners. So let's take a quick moment to thank all of our sponsors who make student attendance free and live stream attendance is free as well to these programs. I know many of you are in the room today, and it's been great working with you as we put together these programs. All right. So that's enough from me until a little bit later today. So let's open up the program by bringing up Rick Gardner, who is the Chief Botanist for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Natural Areas and Preserves.
Well, thank you, Harrison. It's a pleasure to be here to speak. Start things off. I'm Rick Gardner. I'm the Chief Botanist of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Natural Areas Preserves. We have the longest name in our department. And old growth forest for me is something that I've always enjoyed in my entire life. I have great affection for not nature, of course, that's why I'm in this field, but also just the awe and all that about being in a forest that has big trees and all that. And I'm going to kind of lay down the groundwork about old growth forests in Ohio and about Ohio's natural history in general for our speakers that are going to follow me. And I've been around since the Ice Age, been around for a long time, so I'm really good about talking about the history of Ohio. And big trees is what the old growth forests are about, right? Big, huge trees that tower up 100 or so feet. Really wide trees and good to hug, and really inspire people when you're out in one of these and see these forests. It is an emotional connection to them. But Ohio definitely had a lot of old growth forests when the first European settlers or explorers came through Ohio. And some of these trees were huge. And sycamores are the largest trees in eastern North America by girth. And because of that, they were noted by missionaries, explorers, early settlers. Cresswell here is just one of these journals that we have from that time in the 1800s that kind of points out how big these trees were. Manasseh Cutler, who was part of the Ohio Company, who founded Marietta, noted a tree similar to this size that Cresswell says, and also a tree in Scioto County, which has the story that 14 men on horseback escaped a thunderstorm by going to a hollowed out sycamore tree. So these are our largest trees that and Ohio does have the national champion sycamore. And really what ecologists and botanists and conservationists use to kind of draw in and people to conserve sites is going back to these original journals and memoirs. And certainly reading these, you see a lot of what Ohio was like. And I thought Ohio was completely old growth forest and a famous tale that squirrels could go across Ohio without ever touching the ground. And that was a dark, old medieval forest. That's not quite the story, but I'm going to get into that a little bit. So recently, myself, been around studying Ohio's flora for so long and reading these memoirs and studying some of our predecessors, Dr. Paul Sears, for example, who went back to the original surveyor notes. The only on-the-ground survey of Ohio's vegetation were done by the original land surveyors who surveyed the land to describe it for would-be buyers. Because a lot of people, especially in the very early stages, people on the East Coast or even in Europe would use these descriptions to buy the land because they couldn't afford to go out to Ohio and see it before they bought it. So the surveyors described the land using bearing trees or witness trees and also other features so the buyers would know what they were buying. And this one is a note from Williams County, and I highlighted in the actual notes, and then I transcribed it for you, if cursive is hard to read. And this particular 1 mile section, and the bolded numbers are chains, and chains is a surveyor's measurement. 80 chains equals a mile. So if you go from the beginning, he encountered a sycamore that was 4 feet in diameter at 12 chains, which is about 15 tenths of a mile. And then another sycamore at 3 feet diameter. And then another sycamore at 4 feet diameter, a white oak that was another 4-footer, and then a white ash that was nearly a 4-footer. So this is one of the, and surveyors often, when they came across a stand like this, they used the term very fine timber, or pleasant timber, or beautiful landscape with large trees, or ancient trees. So even they were really awed by these trees. Now, we do have stands of old growth trees that date back to the times that the surveyors were surveying back in the late 18th century, early 19th century. And one of those is Johnson Woods State Nature Preserve in Wayne County, just outside of Orrville. And Dr. Maxwell at Indiana University, who studies old growth forests, went there in 2019 and cored trees. And according to him, the oldest deciduous trees that he has ever sampled so far are from Johnson Woods. They date back to 1663. And as you see, the shagbark hickories are a lot older than the red oak trees. So he has explanations of that. But these are some of the oldest trees that we have, deciduous trees that we have in our state and even in the eastern United States. Well, what is an old growth forest? Well, old growth forests have a makeup of canopy trees, the big trees. Then there are sub-canopy trees, which, and then there's a shrub, sapling layer, and then a herbaceous layer, and then detritus, and then actually microbes in the soil. And they also usually have standing dead trees or a fallen tree, or tree fall gap, and fallen logs for critters and stuff, and building up the soil. So going back to this survey line, as you can see, there's another layer of trees that are about 1 foot to 1.5 feet in DBH. And then there is a nice shrub layer, a spice bush, ironwood, musclewood, and dogwood. Now, the actual landscape of Ohio was a mosaic of successional woods, going from stands like this to very young woods. And that's because of Native nations' influence on the landscape. And what our division and other partners in the Department of Natural Resources and outside have been going back to the original land surveyor notes and making a much more refined map than Gordon's vegetation map that was published in 1966, and also stressing more about the influence of Native nations on Ohio's landscape. So here's another memoir by McClure, which he describes Native Americans setting fire to woods to open up the subcanopy, the shrub layer for easy hunting and travel. And then an actual surveyor, we unearthed in the surveyor notes, actually described about the same thing, that they set fire consecutive years to clear up the understory. And the different Native American villages around the state, you come across patches of what we call oak barrens or other open habitats. Barrens is what they usually describe these areas, which are dry hillside prairies with scattering oaks and other trees, mostly oaks, sometimes hickories, and chestnut. And this is a township in Holmes County, right, just east of the Mohican River Valley, which had a lot of Native American villages. And you can see the orange are oak barrens, and there's a spattering of forest. There's a oak woodland at the northern tip. And Paul Sears, who published a map 100 years ago showing what he called oak openings in this region, and lo and behold, there they are. So when you go through these notes, you see over and over again stands of trees that are not in the 1 to 2 foot diameter size. They're not these really old, big trees, as we have often said. And this is from our current data just last week of our mapping project and kind of the breakdown of Ohio's landscapes. And as you see, we always said 95% forested. Really, I say it's going to probably fall in about 90% forested, and others are going to be grass, scrublands, and open wetlands. And there's a lot of references to timber killed by fire. And there's been a lot of charred earth in the early 1800s, late 1700s in Ohio. So that's kind of background of Ohio's landscape at the time of European settlement. Now, Ohio was sought after by colonists because of the riches it had. The timber, the minerals, coal, iron, so forth, that after the War of 1812 and the last Native American resistance in Ohio left, and then further by removing Native Americans in the 1830s and the last Wyandotte in 1843, the influx of Europeans into Ohio exponentially grew. And the stress on the resources of Ohio grew very fast too. The iron industry was huge in the southeastern part of the state, clearing probably the most continuous old growth forests in Ohio. And railroads and all of that led to pretty much old growth forests being totally eliminated from the landscape. And places, families, and local cities like Cincinnati and Cleveland protected some green space. One of the sites that you're going to learn about a little later is Ferguson Land Laboratory in Beaver Creek, which is in Greene County, which the family donated their woods to the school district for a land lab. And black walnut like this one are there, and it's really impressive forest. It was donated to the city, I think, in the early 1900s, if I'm right. And during the 1920s and 1930s, during the Great Depression, the state and federal government started buying up land to conserve it. And in the 1950s, the first nonprofit conservation organization was created, the Nature Conservancy, when conservationists and scientists got fed up trying to get the state and federal government to do something to protect a special place. So they created their own nonprofit to do it themselves and raise private funds. And now we have a lot of nonprofit conservation organizations out there. So this is kind of the reaction to all of this industrialization. And I think that we would probably not really be blown away by Ohio's vegetation back in 1800. Some of the stands that the surveyors describe, we don't have at all anymore. So it's kind of amazing. So that's all I have, and thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Power. I'm a visiting assistant professor here at The Ohio State University in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. Now, you might recognize that my accent is not necessarily from here. Indeed, I am from much further south in the world, in South Africa. Although I have been here for just over 7 years, and in that time, I have completely immersed myself in eastern temperate forests and really begun to love them. And hopefully I can share some of that love and appreciation with these forests with you today. Before I start off delving into my talk, I just want to acknowledge my colleague over there, Jo Peacock. Without her, some of the thoughts that are going to be shared with you today would not be possible. Now, I generally consider myself to be a plant ecologist. And indeed, plants are at the center of my research. However, when we look at forests, we need to look at them just beyond that of the trees. In fact, we need to recognize them as, in fact, communities of interacting organisms. We can see in this lovely postage stamp image here that we see the forest as communities made up of animals, plants, fungi, the air that surrounds them, the soil that surrounds them. Each of these different components of the forest indeed interact with each other. In fact, the living components that interact with each other, we often refer to them as biotic interactions. Now, get an idea of biotic interactions, you can cast your eyes to this particular image here, which highlights some of these potential interactions. And if we just take an example by looking at the large tree on the far left-hand side over there, that particularly large tree provides foliage, provides shelter for a number of different organisms. Some of those organisms feed upon the outputs of that particular tree, and indeed some other organisms even feed upon those organisms, thereby creating some interactions between them. And the critical point about some of these interactions is they ultimately support ecosystem function. And what do I mean by ecosystem function? Well, I mean processes like plant regeneration, nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, predator-prey relationships. Those are all interactions that ultimately support ecosystem function. And the importance of ecosystem function lies in its ability to support ecosystem resilience. And by resilience, I'm referring to the ability of a forest or any ecosystem to recover from a disturbance event. So the stronger your ecosystem function, the stronger your ecosystem resilience ultimately is. Now, for today's talk, I just want to focus on a handful of interactions, mainly those pertaining to interactions between plants, birds, and insects, some of which I'm sure you're very familiar with in eastern temperate forests. We can see on the far left-hand side over there, we have an image of a blue jay bird interacting with an acorn. It's a scatter-hoarding species. It consumes acorns, but it also disperses the acorns. Just right of that, we can see a Lepidopteran larvae caterpillar feeding upon an oak leaf. Oaks provide palatable foliage for those caterpillars to feed upon. Those caterpillars subsequently support migratory birds, like the warbler we see on the bottom left-hand side over there. These interactions go beyond just providing a food source, though, as well. As we can see on the bottom right-hand side there with a northern flicker, it provides habitat. Northern flickers are cavity nesters, and the nest is provided by the trees, or at least in this situation, the dying out trees. Our forests, however, are subject to some degree of disruptions. We've just heard from Rick how our forests have changed dramatically since European colonization. We've indeed seen some magnificent recovery of our forests, at least with respect to cover, over the last 100 years. However, there's still change ongoing within inside our forests. Rick referred to the fact that fire was fairly frequent within our forests. Well, over the last 100 years, we've largely exterminated fire in eastern hardwood forests. It's no longer a component of our forests, yet our forests evolved with these fires. In fact, those fires were critical to supporting the regeneration of many important species, including oaks. And what we found is that by removing that disturbance, we've seen significant changes in the composition of our forests over the last 100 years. And to highlight this, I've taken some data from a study that visited a series of US Forest Service survey plots across the eastern part of the country from the 1980s into the 2010s. And they examined the occurrence of oaks and maples. You can see quercus and acer on the right-hand side there, looking at changes in their importance values, which just refers to the density and size of those particular trees. And what we can note quite neatly between the periods of 1980 and 2015 is that we see a lot of red on the far left-hand side, which means a decline in the importance values of oaks, only for those importance values inside maples to increase over that period of time. So essentially, we've seen a strong shift in the dominant species that make up many of our eastern hardwood forests. Now, these shifts could potentially have strong cascading effects on other organisms that are dependent upon a number of these trees to survive and to reproduce, and ultimately support ecosystem function and resilience. But how do we begin to understand what the potential effects of these disruptions are on these interactions, so we can better support the management and conservation of our forests moving forward? Well, biotic interactions are ultimately mediated by functional traits. Functional traits are measurable attributes of any organism. You and I have functional traits. Your hair color is a functional trait. Well, indeed, organisms in our forests have functional traits too. If we consider trees, we can think of a functional trait like leaf nutrition. Are the leaves full of nitrogen and potentially palatable to caterpillar larvae, which can feed upon them? Or are they perhaps low in nitrogen and less palatable, thereby supporting a lower diversity and lower abundance of caterpillar larvae? Similarly, some species exhibit large seeds, as we see on the oak on the left-hand side of there. Other species exhibit much smaller seeds, like the maple samara on the right-hand side over there. Now, at this point, you might have noticed that all of the traits that I've been touching on, leaf nutrition, the ability to support caterpillars, indeed seed sizes as well, are all ultimately referring to food sources. Now, food sources critically help determine the foraging guild of birds. Now, if we think of functional traits in birds and foraging guilds, the way we can quantify foraging guilds is by looking at the beak morphology of different birds. We have an example here comparing a generalist bird versus an insectivorous bird. Generalists tend to have much larger beaks than insectivorous birds. Having a larger beak allows you to consume a much larger variety of food. We can see our jay once again appearing at the bottom left-hand side there with a large nut inside its mouth. Indeed, it is a scatter hoarder of large acorns, which is quite different to the common yellowthroat. You might not see the name below there, but that's a common yellowthroat warbler. It's an insectivorous species feeding upon caterpillar larvae. So I think by examining these somewhat simple interactions in functional traits, with just respect to the food and foraging dynamics, we start to get a stronger understanding of the mechanistic processes that underline the functional state of our forests, and indeed ultimately the resilience of our forests, which I think collectively can provide us much greater insight into potentially managing our forests in the face of ongoing change and ultimately conserving them. And so to this point, my colleagues and I have established a project where we've gone about starting to examine the interactions between three large organismal groups, plants, birds, and insects across our eastern hardwood forest, to gain a better insight into the impacts of these changing composition, not just in terms of shifts from oaks to maples, but indeed the occurrence of invasive species, the impacts of fragmentation occurring inside a forest. All of these disturbances could ultimately be influencing those interactions. And so you can see on this map, we've got a series of sites occurring across Ohio state forested regions, a gradient from down in the southeast all the way up into the northern central parts of the state, where we've established over 100 plots and have begun surveying the vegetation and avian and insect communities inside those different plots to gain better insight into those interactions. And so I'd just like to leave you with one final thought, in that when we consider the conservation and management of old-growth forests, that we should also be considering the biotic interactions that ultimately support ecosystem resilience out there. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Brian Kane with the Old Growth Forest Network, and thank you, Simon and Rick, for those two great presentations. Simon had talked a little bit about biotic interactions, how critical they are for our old growth forests and for understanding them. And I think a little bit of the work that I do with this nonprofit organization is about the human interactions and the benefits that old growth forests receive from those interactions and those understandings of how human knowledge and human perception of old growth can help their conservation and preservation. We're a national nonprofit organization. Excuse me. I work in the Mid-Atlantic region, so I've come from Virginia this morning, but I cover the states from western Kentucky up to northern New Jersey, and I've had the great delight to spend a great deal of time the last 4 years here in Ohio discovering these sort of surprising old-growth forests that populate the state. Right now, Ohio is sort of a forerunner of our organization in terms of its old-growth presence. We have 38 forests in our network of the 320-some forests in our network that have now received the status of being part of an old-growth network, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. So really, really good to be here this morning and have an opportunity to talk a little bit about our work. Let me advance this slide. Whoops, sorry about that. Trying to think. Just go forward here. There we go. So as I said, we're a national nonprofit. We were formed in 2012 to sort of identify and recognize the best old-growth forest in every county in the United States that is forested. So our goal is to find 2,600 old-growth forests and to recognize them as protected, permanently protected old-growth forests that are accessible to the public. So I've worked closely with the Ohio Natural Areas and Preserves, who have been wonderful partners in our work here in Ohio. And across the different states, we also work with land conservation groups, state forests, state parks, and other county and municipal forests who have old growth within them. So And as I mentioned, our human interaction is really kind of the key to our organization. We're a nonprofit, not only in terms of our funding, but in terms of our volunteer corps that help us to find the best old growth forest in their county or jurisdiction. As I talked about the human interaction, I like Bill Nye, the science guy's quote, where he says, "Everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't." And that has certainly been true in the work I've done with Old Growth Forest Network, is when I come into a region that I'm not living in, I really rely on the expertise of people, as with natural areas and preserves and different universities, to sort of tell us some of the key issues that they're struggling and dealing with in the conservation and preservation of their old growth areas. So, this includes, I've learned everything about, treating woolly adelgid and all the different methods for doing that, to sort of suppressing Japanese stiltgrass. Beech leaf disease is obviously an ongoing concern with many forests, both here in Ohio and up in the Northeast. A lot about deer management, all the different issues that forest managers and forest directors and resource people deal with in their conservation work. And it's really been very helpful to me to understand, what are the challenges out there? Yes, we've set aside these old growth forests, we've preserved them, but there's also a lot of knowledge and ongoing issues that these areas need to keep them present, to keep them protected into the future and resilient. So again, the network is the key. I think the idea that we are a network, it really is a network of human beings. It's not necessarily, we have forests all over the country, but really it's about the knowledge shared between people and the preservation, the desire to preserve and conserve these forests that make our work very valuable and meaningful. We're a group of we have 10 on our staff. We're a completely remote organization, so we get together for conferences and things like that. So we have a very different model of work, and I rely carefully and consistently on local experts to help me in the work that I do in each state. Again, our work is to, as I said, is to identify the best examples of old growth forests in every county and to make sure that they're publicly accessible and permanently conserved and preserved for the future. So really, some of my talk today wants to be about why is this beneficial to a community? Why old growth forest? As both Rick and Simon have mentioned, we are fragmented. The East Coast has less than one half of 1% of original old growth stands remaining. And the work that we do, the forests that we identify, are often those that are on their way to becoming old growth forests, or are highly mature forests, and if preserved and conserved into the future, they will emerge and evolve as true old growth. And Rick explained some of the characteristics of those. And we have many resources on our website as well to help the public sort of understand and learn about old growth forests, everything from a child scavenger hunt to go into an old growth forest up to different management methods that we recommend to foresters as they work to preserve old growth. So how do our forests impact communities? Why is this significant? We have forests that are really kind of in the heart of suburban and urban areas in our network, as well as ones in very remote parts of the state, central Pennsylvania particularly, where they're very hard to reach areas, have to really hike in for a day or two to find these old growth areas. So why are they important? We find that they're really significant, first of all, for the carbon sequestration and storage that they provide. It's sort of an extant method of addressing climate change without having to sort of implement solar panels or wind farms. They're doing their work, they're sequestering large amounts of carbon, and we find that a big value, particularly as many jurisdictions have set carbon goals or carbon reduction goals in their communities. So this is a big part of the work that we like to pronounce and make people know about. This is not just about preserving a stand of old growth trees, but they are workhorses in terms of our national issue of addressing climate change. We also find they're very valuable in terms of understanding cultural history. And Rick showed some wonderful slides about how Native Americans, had fires throughout the Ohio area. We learned about how settlers sort of, devastated the first forest, and what was the mentality behind that? Why was that going on? And then sort of the 20th century arrives and people are pulling back and saying, this is bad. We need to keep our forests. We need to conserve what we have. I learn a great deal from the forest managers when I visit a forest and we bring one of them into the network. This one is out near my home in Virginia and Bull Run Natural Area. It's sort of the easternmost part of the Blue Ridge. And, it was a fascinating slide they shared with me with this. It was an area that's really kind of very poor farmland, a lot of very, very sort of marginal populations living in them, barely making an existence. And one of the families lived there for some 50 years. The gravestone here of one of the family members from 1870, when he passed away at age 51, which was 10 years beyond the life expectancy at that time. So we should be glad we're all here today. But and then this slide I took that afternoon with this tulip poplar growing over it, that same man's gravestone. Some 150 years later. So it told me a little bit about the age of the forest, and as you know, tulip poplars grow pretty darn fast. So, not an ancient tree, but an old tree, and this is a preserved old growth forest in the network. There are also great fonts of well-being and spirituality. So people, as we found, there's more and more knowledge and shared about how educators believe that children need to be out in the outdoors more. Forest bathing has become a thing. There's a lot about brain health and brain wellness that forests bring you. And our work to identify one in every county in the United States is to bring these home to people. You don't need to take a vacation to go out into an old growth forest and to understand their benefits, but you can experience it within an hour's drive of your home. So some of the more humble old growth forests might be closer to a city or a suburb, and that's how we work. So we tried this, the one here on the right that is in a suburb of Philadelphia, and it's about 1 mile from a marked train station going into the downtown Philly, but it was a family that donated this to the township, 90 acres, really is old growth. Some of the trees there were over 220 years old, mostly oak and black gum. So it was a nice example of something close to home, bringing it into the community that people can experience, and from that experience can sort of promote and protect the resources they value and care about. This was a couple years ago. We welcomed in the Hatch Otis State Nature Preserve with Ohio Natural Areas up in Lake County, and a really beautiful spot, one of the many that protects stormwater and protects drinking water. We work closely with jurisdictions to understand what are the watersheds that we're working in. Is there a stream or a river in this forest that is contributing to the health and well-being of that watershed? And obviously, with the uptake of the soils with old growth forests, they protect the streams and rivers from sediment and can also uptake harmful substances. And we use our forest as forums for community education and learning. When we welcome a forest into the network, we also bring with it a naturalist or somebody who knows that forest well to guide a hike in that area that day, and to spread the word about why is this forest valuable. It's listed on our website. We have a list of every forest in our website with directions and some of its salient characteristics, so that people learn, why is this old growth? Why is this important? What's unique about this forest? So here today in Ohio, as I said, Ohio is it's our second best state in terms of contributing to our network of forests. The green areas are indicating the forests that we currently have identified an old growth forest in and have recognized, and they're all listed on our website. Hope you take a look. If it's one near your home, please let us know. Please travel to it. The gray areas are ones where we do not have a forest identified in those counties yet. We're working to it, and I met Emily earlier today with the student organization, and I mentioned to her, hey, if you know students who might want to help us in the county where they reside, reach out to me, let me know, because we only do our best work when we have the contributions of community members who take the time to go out, find the best old growth forest that's publicly accessible in their neighborhood, or tell us about one they think might be. And we guide them, we direct them, we don't sort of send them out cold. But again, Ohio is 12% of our forests are from the state of Ohio, so we're very grateful for that. Volunteer county, we call them county coordinators who help us in the county they reside in, or if you don't live in one, but you travel to one or you know of one, we'd love to work with you. We do training. We don't just throw you out into the wilderness. But a lot of our volunteers are master naturalists, retirees who have taught at universities, who have worked for the Natural Resources Department. So we're armed with some really wonderful people. Again, as our network is really about the people that support the work we do to identify old growth. And just to close out, I'll show you a few examples of some of our recent acquisitions that have joined the network. I think Simon or Rick had mentioned the Ferguson Land Laboratory, and this is in Beaver Creek, Ohio, so it's right Patterson Air Force Base. This is not the middle of nowhere, and it's really that parking lot you see on this slide To the right of that is this old-growth forest. So you're looking at acres of concrete, acres of paving, a really robust community, wonderful, wonderful people that welcomed us that day. And they're probably I think 2 of the largest black walnuts I've ever seen in my life are there. And we had a wonderful day there celebrating this forest and a great hike led by Dave Nolan, a naturalist who has worked a lot in that area of Ohio and is still working with us, helping us to find a few more. In fact, I just visited yesterday Cedar Bog over in Champaign County, take a look at those cedars, as well as some of the other, and talk about large sycamores. There's one there that I think is the largest I've ever seen. So, that's one example over there in Greene County. Close to us here, High Banks Metro Park. It's a really remarkable forest, only because there's so much human activity all through that park. And there I am inside. Rick mentioned the large sycamores you could walk into. I mean, I had to step down in a little step ladder they had set up there. Josh, the forest manager, took me down to show me these 4 on the Olentangy River. And, it sort of like takes your breath away to see these resources. And I think he said they were 300 years old. They are national natural landmarks identified in the 1960s and with the Park Service. With our National Park Service. So a really remarkable forest there and a total surprise. You're walking on asphalt parts through it, and there's Native American earthworks there as well, with many mysteries associated with them. But another wonderful park that we welcomed in a few years ago. And then just last fall, up at Sears Woods. Now, this is another interesting, again, Ohio is filled with surprises. This county is, I think, 12% forested only, and you come into Sears Woods and you're driving through cornfields and soy fields and lots of beautiful farms, and then suddenly you come to this spot and it's a remarkable, very highly mature forest. I don't think it's quite at old growth, but there's some really outstanding trees there that sort of surprise you. And again, that's what Ohio is about, is these surprising areas that are protected and preserved in perpetuity. And this, again, is with Ohio Natural Areas and managed by Crawford County. So again, our mission here is to continue to spread the word about old growth forests, their remarkable resilience, the values they bring into a community. And we only can do that through a network of people. My takeaway today is, please let me know if you are interested in working as a county coordinator, but also to share the word about the work and the value of old growth forests. That's how we grow. That's how we'll become further expanding our knowledge and the desire to protect these resources in a climate where natural resources are frequently under threat from both natural reasons or cultural reasons. So we welcome your thoughts, and please visit the website, find the one near you, and enjoy walking it this winter.
Good morning. My name is Brent Charette. I'm the Director of Land Stewardship for the Arc of Appalachia. Our home base is in Highland County, but we have properties throughout Ohio's Appalachian region. We also have a property in Kentucky, and we have properties in West Virginia as well. Dr. Powers got us to begin by talking about the natural communities. Brian brought in the human communities and the importance of human communities, and I'm going to sort of blend the two together and talk about how the Arc of Appalachia works within that framework. Healthy natural communities are the backbone of an old-growth forest, and the Arc of Appalachia tries to preserve the best of the old-growth of the forests in Ohio. But the reality is that of 14,000 to 15,000 acres that we own, we're in between right now, only acres here and there would truly qualify as old-growth forest. The reality in the eastern temperate hardwood forest is that in general, if the forest was accessible, it was either harvested or cleared to be used for another purpose. And so it's very difficult to find an old-growth forest. We are very lucky because we get to manage property owned by the Ohio History Connection called Fort Hill. It's 1,300 acres of mostly mature forest with probably 30%, somewhere between 300 and 500 acres, that is old-growth forest. So it's an absolutely extraordinary place and incredibly beautiful in the winter. But what we have to remember is that winter cuts both ways. And that is, over the course of the last 5 years, we have had absolutely brutal ice storms at Fort Hill. We had horrific spring windstorms that dropped trees everywhere. And if you look in that image, you'll see a little orange spot back in the middle of that bunch of timber. Well, that's a hard hat. And between where this picture was taken and that hard hat, there's a trail. And we have to clear that out. And so that's the reality of old-growth forests. And it's hard for us who, I would say in general, we're neatniks. We like things clean and orderly. And that's not how old-growth forest works. And what I have to remember is that as difficult, as disheartening as it is to have this happen, it just happens to be my lifetime, because in the terms of a timeline of an old-growth forest, my human lifetime is puny compared to the 4 human lifetimes and even more that expanse of an old-growth forest. And so we have to remind ourselves that this devastation to us that we see is really the heart of pit and mound topography. That those root wads, when they come up, create vernal pools that amphibians are going to use to breed. Those jumbles of rock and the voids in the roots, when they rot away, those become hibernacula for reptiles and nesting places for mammals. And so as difficult as it is to see this happen in our forest, that's the way it is. And our job as managers, as people that are trying to work with this forest, is we have to be vigilant, because when you have those canopy gaps that are created when you lose timber like that, what we have to watch out for is the influx of non-native invasive species. And in particular, we're thinking about things like tree of heaven, Paulownia or princess tree. If enough sunlight hits the ground and the ground is disturbed enough, multiflora rose, winter creeper, and there's a laundry list of things you have to watch out for at that point. In the Arc of Appalachia, we are a small group. There's only 5 land managers that are dealing with 14 to 15,000 acres. And you say, how do you do it? We don't. We can't. There's no way 5 people can do it. And so what the Arc of Appalachia has done is we've mobilized a cadre of volunteers, hundreds, literally, of volunteers that enable us to do as much as we can to take care of our properties. We have 3. I'm going to just talk about a couple of them. We have more than 3. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. One is, somebody mentioned before, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which speaker, but mentioned deer. We have a deer management program. Deer browse on hardwood or tree regeneration, shrub health, and especially ephemeral wildflowers. Deer love trillium. I mean, they will just mow them down. So we have a deer hunting program to manage those. We had in 2024, 2025, so this season's not over yet, so I haven't done the final calculations. In 2024, 2025, we had 155 hunters who put in over 3,000 hours. It was 3,082 hours in the field on our preserves. Not only were they working with the deer herd, but they're our eyes. They're watchful over our preserves. They're local people, so we're building local connections to the community with our preserves, and they take ownership. They take a sense of ownership about that preserve. And not only that, Another way that they give back to us is once a year, we have a hunter's work day. And those hunters come out, and it's between 35 and 40 people that usually come out, and we pick a project. And it might be non-native invasive species removal. Last year, it was to help us build a trail. And we cut 3/4 of a mile of trail. We put in bridges, we put in steps, we put in water bars. It's invaluable. It stretches us and multiplies our effectiveness. We base our culling quotas on field work, field observation, trail cams, and we work with the Division of Wildlife. So they're invaluably helpful. We have another group that works within our system of preserves, and that's called the forest keepers. The forest keepers, they're most interested in doing something about non-native invasive species. And we plan work days both in the spring and the fall across the preserve system. And last year, those volunteers donated 456 hours of effort on our preserves. And what we've observed, and it goes without saying, and Dr. Powers mentioned it, is that the lowest pressure of invasives are in our healthiest forests. If you have a healthy forest and the invasive has a more difficult time getting started, they have to have that full complement of bacteria, fungi, a whole array of plants, animals, everything from insects to mammals, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that we've observed, though, is that at the root of it, what we observe is that soil is the key. If you have healthy soils, you're more likely to have that full complement of biotic life. And our cultural practices as human beings have a tremendous impact on that soil health. You know, haphazard logging can change the hydrology of a site forever. Cultivation, under agricultural cultivation, that can take decades to change from the time that last furrow was turned. So we have to be conscious of how our human impacts, how the human community impacts that biotic community that we're working with. One of the ways that we deal with this in the Arc of Appalachia is there's this human disassociation with the natural world. Somehow there's this chasm between us. And so we can go and visit that beautiful forest, but it's almost like it's a different planet, because then we go home and that's a different place. We don't see the connection between, that this is all connected. And so we work very hard in the Arc of Appalachia to restore that connection. And one of the ways we do that is we build trails. And we have, this year we'll surpass 100 miles of trails in our preserve system. And our trails are different. They're not wide avenues. We have the luxury of not having to have wide avenues. We want small, compact, intimate trails where the hiker is going to come into contact with the natural world. It's going to be brushing their legs. It's going to be right there. We use natural materials whenever we can to build the trail. So when we have steps, what can we use that's right there to build those steps so it's seamless? Aesthetics are tremendously important to us. It's not about getting from this point on the trail down there. How do we get there? What do we show you? How do we present it to you? How do we frame that 36-inch hemlock? We want you to fall in love with the forest. We want you to restore that connection. We have a robust education system. And our education is everything from the youth, but for older adults or for more mature people, we have what's called the Appalachian Forest School. And we have deep dives, 3-day immersive events that cover any manner of topics. This spring, we have Associate Professor Emeritus Robert Clips, who's going to lead a 3-day workshop on bryophytes. We have fireflies, we have fungi, we have mycology, we have Mothapalooza. If you haven't done Mothapalooza, you should check it out. So we have all kinds of in-depth studies as well. This year, we're going to explore old growth in the forests of Jesse Stewart, poet laureate from Kentucky, and one of our properties, John Roger Simon Farm in Scioto County. And we're also going to look at the forests that were studied by Dr. E. Lucy Braun, the University of Cincinnati. So we are going to look at those forests and how they impact us. What we want to do is we want to merge the human community with the most stunning natural communities in the state. Our task, not just ours task, but in the case of the Arc of Appalachia, we need to steward those 14,000 of acres into the future. The reality is, most of these forests, they're not old growth now, but they are the old growth of tomorrow. And we have to think in terms of much more than human lifetimes. We need to think in the long view and old growth lifetimes. And for me, that's something worth working for and trying to achieve. Thank you.
So hello, Jeff Johnson, Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. I'm the chief of the division. Going last is sometimes great, sometimes it's not, because you can sit there the whole time and say, oh, yeah, I was going to mention that. Yeah, there go 3 more of my slides. So that's kind of happened with me. And in hindsight, I almost think I should have gone first, because I'm going to be like the black cloud, so to speak, of old growth forests in Ohio. But I think there's a good message at the end. But I'm going to share upon, wrong one. What did I do? Let's try this instead. There we go. We just do it this way. So just kind of a real quick brief overview, and I'm going to run through this stuff really, really fast. But where have all the forests gone? And Rick mentioned some of my slides in his presentation about the natural resources, the mineral resources especially that Ohio's had, and the extraction of that. Salt production down in Jackson County area was the site of the salt reserve. It was the largest salt producing region of the nation at one point in time, except those places on the East Coast where they were taking it from the sea. So they actually had, and in this little picture there you see in the upper left, that's a salt boiling house where they actually had 60 kettles would be set up in there, where they would run these kettles 24 hours a day. They were looking at 3,600 gallons of water, brine water, that they were evaporating every day, creating around 400 pounds of salt every 24 hours. And they did this for years down here. So if you're thinking about the firewood that's needed to run 60 kettles in one of these houses, and there were up to 6 houses like this running at one time, we're talking thousands and thousands of acres that they cut just for firewood to fuel the salt industry. Coal mining. Big muskie. Ohio's great for a lot of having firsts. We have the largest drag line that was ever created in the world that was right here in Ohio, so we could strip off the ground even faster than anybody ever thought we could. And in order to get to the coal, they took off all the trees. So once again, Southeast Ohio is getting beat up really, really badly. The bucket there, you can see people staying at massive mounds of earth being moved. Iron production, southern Ohio again, so the hill country. The sandstone has a high iron content. They would make charcoal out of the forest, again, cutting that down, making tremendous amounts of charcoal, thousands of acres a year that were being used for the 20-some blast furnaces that were in southern Ohio. So once again, I'm going to use a bad term here, but the eco-rape of southeastern Ohio for all these industries. Agriculture, obviously, especially when you flat ground, we still see that. But in southern Ohio, in the hill country, there were a lot of farming that were on those hills for subsistence farming. And once again, another way that we lost so much of our forest. So that kind of brings us, what do we have left in? And I'm going to do a really quick tour around the state and just talking about a few of the forests we've got. And these are all ones, I think, that are in the Old Growth Forest Network and that are managed by our division. So I'm trying not to pick on other groups or anything like that. But Kyle Woods over here in Mahoning County, really, really neat site. But if you look at this, this, here's a site. We're talking 82 acres, so it's not large, and it's completely surrounded by urbanization, and you're going to see that as a common trend. And then this is going to go into Dr. Powers' talk about, we're talking about old-growth forest, and a forest is this community that has all these things together. So when you make it up in a fragmented site, or do we really have a true old-growth forest, or we just have an old woodlot? And that's what you're going to see with a lot of these. So that's Kyle Woods. Hagodas that you actually, Brian already mentioned this one. Once again, Northern Ohio up in Lake County. And if you take a look at that, once again, urbanization all around this. So we're preserving what's remnants, these, which are important to do, but how really, functional are these as full landscapes? About 130 acres here at Hagodas. Solon Woods, one we dedicated a couple years ago. Absolutely beautiful old growth trees, wetland complexes up here in Cuyahoga County. And yes, you're thinking Cuyahoga County, there's actually green stuff in Cuyahoga. Yeah, look where we're at, right in the middle of town. This is in the town of Solon. We're completely surrounded by development once again. So expansion of these and keeping these areas in this status is difficult. Johnson Woods, we're getting a little larger. Now we're pushing the 200-acre mark at Johnson Woods. This is in Wayne County. Really, really cool. I think Rick may have mentioned this as well in his talk. But once again, if you look here, we don't have the urbanization necessarily, but we have ag that completely surrounds us. And we just heard from Brett, it's like that ag property. Even if you want to expand this, we're talking decades before you can turn ag fields back into something that's going to support forests in a healthy way. So we're talking, millennia to get an old-growth forest to grow back, oftentimes in some of these locations. Gall Woods, part of the great swamp up in northwest Ohio in Fulton County. Same situation here. If you look at this, the whole area is ag. It's all been drained. We have these little isolated patches. So I think we're 340 acres or so at Gall Woods. I don't know, maybe a third of that is kind of the old growth section. Really, really awesome woods, but once again, very isolated and difficult to imagine these expanding tremendously from where their footprint is now. Over in Western Ohio, we've got some really, really cool spots. A lot of these, once again, you're going to see the same story. Drew Woods, it's 15 acres. It's very small, but it is amazing 15 acres of property. But once again, smack dab in the middle of the heart of farmland over in Western Ohio. Lawrence Woods. Probably our best chance to actually talk about landscape scale, old growth forest, and the fact that we have over 1,000 acres here. And we do have the potential to add some more. Some really, really cool trees, really nice wet woods in these areas. So this one actually is starting to get into that area where you might think of it as a forest type community. So we have this. Now, I did choose the worst of all the ones we've got to kind of show this problem. We do have the potential in Ohio for actual producing better woods. Dan's back here, the chief of the Division of Forestry, and I didn't bring any of your sites in, Dan, but we do have some woodlands and stuff around Ohio that definitely has a potential. Sorry, there's a picture again of Lawrence Woods, completely surrounded by ag properties. I want to move on now real quick, and this is going to be the conspiracy to eradicate all old-growth forests in Ohio. And this has already been mentioned, and Brett's mentioned this and several others. But if you look at the conspirators I'm talking about, a lot of these are invasives. 250 years ago, our forests grew up in an area where we didn't have these species to compete. Now we do, and if you leave things to their own devices, this is what happens. The shrubby layer comes in, bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, barberry, and things like that. Maybe even worse than some of those are some of the herbaceous that come in, which we didn't think they were going to be as big of a problem. We think of tree of heaven and some of the shrubby ones as being the worst competitors, but things like stiltgrass, they form such dense mats across the ground that seedlings cannot germinate. We are completely losing entire classes of trees because we don't have the ability to keep these things out of our forest. So it sounds really bad. We've got other stuff that's killing things. The insects are coming, and they're coming out in faster numbers. Emerald ash borer, longhorn beetles, the hemlock woolly adelgid. All these things are conspiring to take out our trees, and especially some of these are taking out our biggest, our canopy trees. Diseases are also doing this, and I think a couple people have already mentioned this, the beech leaf disease, thousand canker disease. A lot of our species are under attack, and you have to almost wonder, is any of our native species going to survive this stuff? This was mentioned, and Brett already talked about this. Invasive mammals, deer, and I will tell you right now, if you think that deer are under control in Ohio, you are sorely mistaken. Our population of deer in Ohio is decimating our forests. Just like Brent said, I mean, you look at, you know, the wildflower populations across the state, that is a direct impact primarily from the deer here. And we really got to get a handle on this. The browse they do is incredible. If you look at this picture, I think this was a 2-year project. This was the second year into a deer exclosure program. Just look on one side of the fence versus the other. That's just 2 years of growth difference. They're having a tremendous impact. And then Mother Nature, once again, everybody's talked about this one already. You know, and this comes back to the size of a lot of our sites. When you have a forest that's 15, 20 acres in size and winds come through, those big canopy trees, the ones that we look at as being the old growth trees, they take the brunt of those storms, and they're the ones that crack, and they're the ones that come down in those storms. All these things are conspiring against us. So, can we win this? So I guess here's my little message of hope before we get into the panel discussion, is that yes, we certainly can, but what it is, it's a different game now than it was 100 years ago. You used to be able to cut a forest and a good forest would come back. If you cut a forest now, what comes back is not the same forest you had. It takes a lot of management. And I'm glad that Brent talked about the fact that he has volunteers and groups that come out to take care of this, because that's what this comes down to, is a management game. We can manage for old growth, but it just takes a tremendous amount of effort. And that's what I think my takeaway is that we can do this. We have the ability. But we just have to make sure it's a concerted effort in order to see that in 200 years, there is more old growth in Ohio than there is today. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ellie Ewing. I'm a lecturer here in the School of Environment and Natural Resources in Environmental Law and Policy. Recently left my position as Executive Director of Captina Conservancy, another nonprofit land trust like the Arco Appalachia. I spent some time managing and transitioning Dysart Woods, which is 50 acres of old growth. Jeff, you'll be happy to hear, surrounded by another 350 acres of successional forest. So based on that experience, I do have some background, but I think we were supposed to have about 15 minutes for audience Q&A. Do you want to jump right to that rather than the moderated panel? Okay, sure. So panelists, come on up. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 questions and then move to the audience. So I thought it would be helpful. I've outed myself as an attorney, maybe. I forget if I mentioned that. But I love definitions. We've been throwing around this term old growth forest off and on here. And I'd be interested if we have an actual definition of what do we view as an old growth forest. Maybe Dr. Power from an ecological perspective to start, and Brian from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult thing to pin down in today's society, particularly we generally consider old growth to be about the age of the trees that dominate a particular forest. From someone who works in restoration and forestry, I often look at it from the perspective of function. Can the forest still maintain its function, its ability to support other organisms, to support ecological processes? That's how I often view a definition, at least, of an old growth forest. Can it maintain its natural functions?
Great. Brian, what about with your group? I mean, it's right there in your name. How do you answer the questions, probably from a cultural perspective?
Sure, and it's the number one question we get asked, what is an old growth forest? And we try to kind of pull away from the idea it's not a virgin forest. It's not ever been touched. No, that's not true. I think what we look at it is, and I think Jeff may have mentioned this, to allow an existing highly mature forest to eventually get to that point to be old growth. So it's going to have all those attributes that we look for. And again, our website has really wonderful resource sheets on this. What is an old growth forest? We have wet and dry in the United States, wet and dry old growth forests. So we list the attributes of those to help people understand them. Our executive director, who founded our organization, she often says, when you're walking in the woods and you suddenly enter a zone where it is true old growth, you know it. You feel a difference, and I've experienced that many times in my work, and you really do suddenly know this is very different than the 70 to 80-year-old forest in my backyard or near the metro station. It is a very, very different experience, and I think The more you experience and walk in them, I think the more you begin to identify and understand how they differentiate themselves from sort of our standard second growth forests.
Great. And Rick, from your research, were you able to get a sense from the records of what appreciation those first explorers had, the first Europeans who came to Ohio? Did they have a sense of how old these trees were and the unique nature of what they were looking at? Are you able to tell?
Well, the memoirs, definitely from people, they definitely mentioned that and mentioned the age and size of the trees and kind of a spiritual connection to the trees. Some of them certainly brought that into their journals and stuff like that.
And I think you can tell from some of the photographs, just the kind of sense of scale, that they documented that for a reason.
Yes, yeah. They often refer to the forests around them, how big they were and just how expansive they were, and the various critters that were in the forest.
Great.
So I'm big into history too, just like Rick is. And so for the size of the trees, now this isn't an Ohio tree, it's actually on the other side of the Ohio River. But one I've used in a lot of programs to talk about was in 1749, I think it was, Celeron, French guy, came down the Ohio River claiming all the territory north and west of the Ohio River for France. They called it the Celeron Expedition. On one of their stops, they pulled into this little tributary, or a decent-sized tributary to the Ohio River. And they got out, and that's where they had lunch and all this kind of stuff going on. There was a Jesuit missionary that actually took journal writings. And in his journal, he wrote in his journal, and it says, "We dined inside a hollow cottonwood tree where 29 men ranged side by side." So we're talking about, now cottonwood, actually they were referring to a sycamore because it was not cottonwood. They used different names back then. But if you can imagine 29 people, if you took 29 of you and actually crammed you all together in the center, that was the size of the hollow inside this sycamore tree. So that's the stuff they were saying. Now that was remarkable, obviously, because he made note of it in a journal, but still, just the sheer size of trees that they would have seen then compared to what we see now, it's just, none of those are left. Those trees are all gone, and we will probably never see trees of that size because they require a contiguous forest to grow. But if we can get trees where 5 people can get inside, that's still pretty amazing. And that's what we're striving for, is to get that.
Thanks, Jeff. Brent, I was curious from your perspective with the ARC, you talked a lot about the volunteers and the community members that support your work. What about the kind of structures that you use to fund this long-term preservation? As we acknowledge, the state and the federal governments can't do it all. How do these private and nonprofit groups use those tools?
We have a multitude of very generous benefactors that help underwrite our work. But at the same time, we rely, and in fact, our growth can almost be attributed to one program called the Clean Ohio program. And Clean Ohio essentially can support 75% of your acquisition. Well, it just multiplied our efforts by 4 times, by 3 times. And so those grant programs, not only do they purchase the property, they help us hire contractors to work with non-native invasive species. They help us work with hemlock woolly adelgid. We can purchase the materials we need to do that. So grant programs are absolutely essential. And on another level, there's EPA's WRRSP program, which helps us purchase properties and work on restoration or preservation. So it's certainly, I guess we're lucky because we get to be out front, but there's an army behind us that supports our work.
Fantastic. I think we have about 10 minutes left if we want to move to some audience questions.
Chief Johnson, in your talk, you mentioned something along the lines of the difference between is this an old growth forest or is it just an old woodlot? And I was wondering if you could expand on that, the difference in quality to our ecosystems of a fully fledged forest with a lot of biotic communities interacting with each other, like in Dr. Powers' talk, versus one that is not quite to that level, and if something like an old woodlot is still a valuable ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Dr. Powers actually talked a lot about this, and I think he's probably more qualified maybe to answer the question than I, but, a lot of our, 15-acre, old growth forest is not a forest. I mean, 15 acres does not comprise enough aspects of forest ecology on its own to be what I would consider an old growth forest. That's an old growth woodlot. It's got old trees in it. It's awesome. You take a walk there, you get that still awe-inspiring feel because of the trees, but you don't have the interactions. You don't have the food webs, if you want to use that old term. You don't have all those things that make a forest a forest. And I don't know if there is a size, if you can actually point that says, well, once you break 300 acres, you've got enough land that you can have a forest versus a woods. I'm not a researcher in that regard, but I think there is some kind of a line that you cross when you go from, just a really neat woods with a lot of old trees to that forest situation. And I think in Ohio, anyhow, we really need to look to the future to try to protect as much ground as we can so that we can get to the point where forests are old growth, not just woodlots. And I will say, and Dan, I'm going to throw you out there again, in the state forest system, they've got their, their high conservation value use forest. I can't remember if I've got your acronym right or not, but they've recognized some of these areas that do have old trees, and let's protect areas around that so we can actually make sure that these get promoted to be protected long range. I don't know if you want.
Oh, I would agree with that 100%. I think there's a strong difference between what you might consider to be a woodlot versus an actual functioning forest. And the size of the differences between those does certainly vary between the type of forest you're working with, the type of surrounding environmental conditions that make up that forest. If you think about a small woodlot versus a large-scale forest, it's very difficult to implement some form of natural disturbance like a prescribed burn inside a small woodlot versus a large-scale forest, which is a critical component to maintaining the functioning of that ecosystem.
And from a conservation organization standpoint, I would say that what the Arc of Appalachia often tries to do, we may start out with 50 acres here, but we're always looking to add adjoining properties because we know that the bigger buffer you have, the more you're going to have a better chance of surviving it, expanding it, and improving it.
Questions?
Hi, Brent. Arc Appalachia. Tell me where your Fort Hill property is. Is that like several counties in the state? Where is Fort Hill?
Fort Hill is in Highland County, and it's real close to Ross County, so it's probably closest to Bainbridge, Ohio, and on the other side would be Peebles. So on State Route 41. Between
is that one county?
It's in Highland County.
Highland County.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever see a future where this property could be transferred to the state of Ohio? Natural areas and preserves?
So interesting you bring that up. So it is owned primarily, and actually ARC owns some property there, but it's owned by the Ohio History Connection. So it's kind of a quasi-state government agency already. And there is a document sitting on the desk of the Director of Natural Resources to dedicate Fort Hill as a state nature preserve as we speak. When she gets back within the next 10 days, that will be dedicated as a state nature preserve. You guys are the first to hear that. It's not even made a press release. That is going to be happening probably within the next 10 days. So everybody give a round of applause for that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So Southeast Ohio has a lot of forest area, state forest, the Wayne National Forest. It's about 30%. It makes probably, in terms of area, the largest amount of forest that we have in Ohio, not just woodlots. But unfortunately, we find as hikers and enjoying the forest that there's quite a bit of logging going on, which seems to us detrimental because it disturbs the ground. It changes the community, invasives come in, it was pointed out. Yet, talking to foresters, sometimes we hear we need to do this logging to create open habitat for grouse, etc. and what was also alluded to, the change from from oak forest to maple forest. So how is that being addressed?
I think one of the first things we have to recognize is that us as human beings are very much part of the ecosystem. We can't just simply remove ourselves from the ecosystem, we're very much part of it. And part of our existence within the ecosystem is the use of that ecosystem as well. Of course, that use needs to be done in an appropriate manner, an equitable manner, so as to not damage the forest further on. So, I think when we think about forest management, forest conservation, and restoration broadly, we need to think of it more holistically, that indeed there could be some areas where there are high value areas that we leave alone and we don't even allow human beings to enter those particular areas. But then on the other end of the scale, there are areas where we can use them for potentially timber production, providing some degree of ecosystem services as well. By providing some forms of mechanical clearing, we are indeed also actually mimicking some degrees of disturbances that we've removed from the landscape as well, actually. So, I understand where you're coming from your question. I grew up in a country whereby keeping humans out of the landscape was, for conservation areas, was very much part of the program. But through my own journey in my career and life, I've begun to recognize the role of human beings in the landscape and the fact that human beings were impacting these landscapes long before Europeans even arrived on the landscape. The forests that we experienced as Europeans first coming out here were actually shaped by human beings. They were not naked of human beings at all, actually. And so we need to often consider that when looking at our natural areas, I think.
No, I'll just add, I think, if you look at Ohio's forests over time, and Rick, maybe you can jump in on this too, but 5,000 years ago, Ohio was warmer than it is now. There was what they used to refer to as a xerothermic period. I think they've changed the name on that. I'm not sure what the current terminology is. But the forests were adapted to a warmer environment. Oaks thrived in that. Then you had Native Americans that were coming in, they were doing burns. Oaks are adapted to that burning regime. We come in and in the late 1800s, early 1900s with settlement, and we had I've got a poster that I found one time where there's a the death with a sickle riding on a horse, dripping fire off of him. Death rides on a horse or something like that. I can't remember. But it was to scare people about forest fire, and we stopped all burning. So you want to talk about the conversion from oak to maple? That's our management strategies that have allowed most of that to happen. So I know in a lot of our landscapes, on a lot of our preserves and a lot of the forests, we're trying to bring those types of regimes back, and that's my message of hope at the end was that we do have to have a very heavy hand if we're going to move forward and see these forests kind of remain and actually grow and spread across the state. So it's management at this point is going to be the key to all that.
Forests, as was mentioned earlier, they have multiple uses. And the Wayne National Forest, Jeff brought the high conservation value forests, the state forests, those are set aside because they have old growth timber or something of conservation value. I did a lot of studies on the Wayne National Forest for special interest areas and research natural areas, and those are areas set aside. And some of them are 1,000 acres or whatever. So there's different management techniques, and these forest areas are meant to be managed properly using the best science, and also and for preservation and recreation as a hiker. So.
Well, thank you all to all of our panelists. You can feel free to head back to your table. Let's take a moment to give a round of applause to everybody here. Rick, Brian, Simon, Jeff, and Brent, all five of you, thank you for your presentations today. And then Ellie, as our moderator, it was great to have you here. Per EPN tradition, we have certificates to honor your commitment to old growth forest management. I'll pass those out to you in a moment after I step down. While I'm up here, I figured I'd give you a little bit of an announcement of some upcoming programming, both in person and virtually, that we have with the EPN. Firstly, I wanted to talk a little bit about EPN, about one of our programs that you might consider participating in next month. So I'm going to skip ahead to talking about the Big Darby Accord. If you live here in central Ohio, you might be familiar with the Big Darby Creek. It's one of the most biodiverse when it comes to freshwater fishes and mussels. And you might have heard that there's a new accord that we'll discuss and certainly lay out the plan for how that watershed will be managed when we think about development and conservation together as one. So the Big Darby Accord, it's a hot topic right now. We're going to be bringing in folks from essentially the planning process in 2006 that did not see a lot of success to talk about what didn't work so well as we plan for the new accord right now. So that's February 10th right here next month. And then after that, in March, on March 10th, we're going to talk about rural resilience to flooding and thinking about how different communities who might be experiencing essentially reduced opportunities for resources due to changes in the federal government funding climate, as well as climate change literally. All these sorts of changes shift flood risk. So the March program that we'll have right here, again, in partnership with the Water Management Association of Ohio, will essentially dive into how communities can identify resources that can allow them to prepare for that flood risk. And a lot of these are communities that might have never had to consider flood risk like this before. Okay. So, going forward, we're really excited to talk a little bit more about how the EPN is moving into the 21st century now in 2026 by having a better online presence that allows us to effectively engage with community members from all across Ohio. Certainly, all of you here in person, many of you live in Columbus. I know some of you drove in from further away. We are working to have better service providing for people who are not here in Columbus. And part of that is, yes, we now have a LinkedIn, believe it or not, in 2026. So go ahead and give us a follow there. But beyond that LinkedIn, we've been working really closely with a lot of community partners from all across the state to develop what we're calling EPN Connect. So I'm happy to give you a little bit of a rundown about that today. And EPN Connect, I should mention, we have our sponsors in the room. It's funded by the Ohio EPA's Office of Environmental Education's Ohio Environmental Education Fund. Lots of acronyms here, but we are really grateful for the Ohio EPA and for many of our sponsors who provided us the funding to accomplish this project, EPN Connect. So essentially, what I want you all to walk away from after today and beyond in our different programming is it's one thing to come to a program in person and meet a few people who happen to be sitting at your table. You know, we hear all the time that there should be more opportunities for networking at our programs. And we're building that in, online and in person going forward. So imagine coming to a program like here today and making a couple of contacts, grabbing a couple of business cards. How cool would it be if you were able to continue that collaborative momentum online? That's what we're building here with EPN Connect. We will be launching an account submission creation portal later this month, and then on Earth Day 2026, so only a couple months out, everything is going to go live. Essentially, this will be the first time for folks from all across the state, no matter what sector you're working in, whether it's forestry, fisheries, wildlife, social justice topics, really anything, all part of this program, EPN Connect. So imagine being able to have a free, quick and easy way to find people based off of expertise, based off of location, based off of projects. Really anything you want to know, you could find here on EPN Connect as long as it's on the database. So let me stop and say that this is all essentially user-submitted data. This does not work the same way that old growth forest management activities that we heard about today do not work without community participation. So we're doing a lot of work right now to lay that social groundwork as we prepare to launch EPN Connect on Earth Day. So Hallie, my colleague, and I are spending a lot of time on the road, driving across all of Ohio, meeting people where they are to talk about this project. And eventually, on Earth Day, you will all have the opportunity to go in and check out all the different people, projects, resources, events, jobs, etc., that are existing on the website. A little bit different from LinkedIn, right? Because this is a case where you can find information about people. You don't have to sift through your connections on LinkedIn. Everybody has equal access on EPN Connect as long as you have an account. And you have 2 dedicated staff members that are here for the state of Ohio's environmental community who are here to steward those connections in perpetuity. So we're really excited about EPN Connect as that platform to continue the collaborative momentum online for all of Ohio's environmental people. As we've been navigating the development of EPN Connect, if you were here in December, you probably heard me ask this question to the panelists: what is an environmental professional? We've been toying with this question because we've had to reconsider, what does an environmental professional mean in practice? There are so many people here today who might be professionally trained in a variety of natural resource topic areas. Yeah, you're an environmental professional, but what about the folks who don't have that same background, who certainly are doing the same, if not more, for the environment here and are certainly well-respected community members of the EPN? So we are thinking about revisioning what does environmental professionals network mean, especially as we launch the EPN Connect platform, because we want this to be inclusive for all of Ohio's environmental people, no matter what background they have, no matter what county they live in. We want this to be a platform that is useful for you. You all are the Environmental Professionals Network. I think that's important to say. So this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be a member directory. That's just one piece of it. A member directory that you can search based off of location, topic area, when we actually have 20 preloaded topics that are part of the site. You can search by a variety of other useful things you might want to know about somebody, like the type of person they are, whether they're an educator or a researcher, an environmental professional, or a variety of other different topics. You can also browse by tags. So we have a lot of OSU alumni in the room. You could search by who is an OSU alum, or who went to Ohio University, or who is open to work, who is looking for, to hire. All these sorts of different social affiliations are enlisted on the website as well. So let me show you what a sample profile looks like, just to get you a little bit excited as we prepare for this Earth Day launch. And I see Chelsea in the back of the room. Sorry, we picked on you as we created sample data for a test profile. But what you're looking at right here is, we're thinking the minimum amount of information that somebody might need to know about someone else in order to say, yeah, I want to send them an email, I want to reach out to them. So you'll get a little bit of information about their organizational affiliations. We all know folks oftentimes are affiliated with multiple organizations. You can definitely list both, or 3, or multiple here. You'll get contact information. Lots of organizational websites don't have that specific contact information for different professionals, and let alone the specific types of projects that everybody's working on within an organization. So this is your opportunity to get that granular, detailed information about who's doing what within an organization to make that initial outreach a little bit easier. Whether you're looking for a partner for a project that you're working on, or if you're a student and that you're looking for someone who could be a mentor because they have an expertise area or a career path that you find interest in. Also on the profile, you'll get some information about where people live, county-wise, as well as where they work, which can be 2 very different things, especially for our state agency folks. You'll find a little bit information about the topic areas that person works on, as well as more specific information about the projects specifically that they engage within. So you can think about that as the areas of work. Imagine being able to read 400 characters worth of text about the general day-to-day activities that someone works on. That would help to narrow that gap, decision-making wise, about whether I'm going to reach out to that person. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Environmental Career Ambassadors Program. We have Brenda Metcalf in the room, who is from the Environmental Education Council of Ohio. We work with her as well as the Ohio EPA to co-steward the Environmental Career Ambassadors Program. On every user's profile, they'll have the opportunity to say yes or no. We hope most people say yes. Yes to the fact that they are willing to work with students and come into their classrooms to provide environmental education opportunities. So if you're a teacher, or if you are looking to expand environmental education opportunities for your classroom or for a variety of informal purposes, you could find someone who's a local expert in a certain topic area on this website, essentially by adding in that Environmental Career Ambassadors check mark to your structured search online. So this is just a sample of different search criteria that you might add into an EPN Connect search, whether it be based off of topic area, or if that topic area is not specific enough, maybe you have a certain thing like data centers and water quality that you're really interested in knowing who's doing that kind of work. Well, you can enter in those search terms in the bottom right in a more text-based sort of approach. You can browse by those tags that I mentioned earlier. Really everything that you might think about as separating people into different groups, it's all here. Beyond people and projects, this is going to be a home, we hope, for different events. So far, we've identified over 700 different environmental organizations throughout all of Ohio, and we've talked to a lot of them already. And we found that a lot of these organizations are looking for a central place to share their programming or to identify other programs that folks might want to attend. So imagine having the opportunity to, firstly, post your own events if you have them, but then to identify what might be a relevant community event that you want to spend your time at, or if you are planning a program, what's already planned in my county on this day, based off of what's already on this website. So this is an events directory. We have a jobs and opportunities directory. This is a great time for me to mention that everything you've seen so far, and that I'll continue to show, is community sourced. The data itself is community sourced, but also the structure that you're looking at right now is based off of feedback that we received from dozens of partners, leaders in the environmental field from all over Ohio, many of whom are in the room with us today. So we've received feedback such as, well, it shouldn't just be a jobs board, like a full-time jobs board. It should also be inclusive to things like internships and fellowships and board openings. So this is an opportunities directory. It's inclusive of all those different sorts of things people might want to know about. Resources, you can think about this as being inclusive of funding opportunities. It could include webinars or data sets or fact sheets, really anything that you might have that other people might want to know about that fits into this resource category, there's a home for that too. Okay, so we're going to be opening up the new account submission portal later this month. When that happens, we'll certainly reach out to you to let you know in a variety of ways on our LinkedIn, through our mass contact, emails, in other formats too. We're going to be on the road, so if any of you want to have conversations with either myself or my colleague Hallie to talk about your own ideas for EPN Connect, please reach out. We are more than happy to make changes to what you just saw based off feedback that you have. We've already been doing that quite a bit. So let's do this together. You are all, like I mentioned, the Environmental Professionals Network. We have different people who attend our programs monthly because we rotate topics monthly. Everybody is part of the Environmental Professionals Network, and we're hoping that that will essentially be a vehicle for coordination online through EPN Connect. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in advance for EPN Connect. It's been a lot of effort to find opportunities for this coordination online. And I'll just say that if you have the zero waste materials at your tables, please go ahead and place them in those black bins along the wall as you exit. If you have a ceramic coffee mug, go ahead and just leave that at your table. We'll take care of that. They're a little too fragile to put into those bins. So thank you for being here, and it was great to talk about old growth forest management. Thanks again to our speakers and to our moderator, and have a great rest of your day.